Hello everyone, thank you very much for watching this video. So I created this video to answer a question regarding the transactional annotation and how to use it to roll back exceptions. I understood that there was a problem with one of the projects and I can't figure out from just your questions which exactly is your problem. So I will create another project in which I will exactly try what I've understood from your question, and I will explain how it should work, and maybe you can spot what is actually what you are doing differently than me. So I have created this project where I have only the needed dependency for my Spring context, JDBC because I would like to connect to a database and test everything, and then I have the transactional dependency because I will use the platform transaction manager because the question is about transactionability with Spring. JDBC again, well, this one basically we can remove it, so I've added it twice by mistake. And then I have my MySQL connector Java because I will connect to a MySQL database and I need the JDBC driver for that. So my project is very simple. I have a main class. From the main class I only load the context. I use a configuration class here. It's called the project config class, and then I retrieve from the context a bean of type user service, and then I call this add user method. So my user service bean is a service annotated bean, so it's part of the context. I have added the transactional annotation as you said over the class, and then I inject here a JDBC template, and I have the add user annotation that throws an exception after an insert is done into my database. I have a simple user table with an username and the password, and anyway the question is regarding if the record is added or not to the database. So of course I also need a configuration class. This is the third and the last class of my project. Is annotated with that configuration. I have used enable transaction management to enable the transaction management. I have used component scan because I need to tell somehow Spring to search into the services package for this service annotation and create the bean in the context. And then I have only initiated my data source to the local Spring database with my default user and password. And then I have a platform transaction manager. I use the simplest, the data source transaction manager based on the data source that I have created above. All of them are beans in the context. And then I create the JDBC template so that it's easier for me to send the query and to execute the query. That's why here I inject the JDBC template. So is the JDBC template which is been in the context, is based on the data source. I inject it here in the service class. Again, I use transactional, and then I have the add user here that throws an exception, which is a checked exception. So remember that Spring doesn't roll back by default for checked exceptions, which means that if I run it now exactly as it is, I will see the exception in the log because I have caught it here in the main class and I have printed it out in the console, but the user will be stored in the database, so I will see the record of my user in the database. So let's run it for the moment like this and see what happens. Again, our expectation is that we will see in the database the record because by default for checked exceptions Spring doesn't roll back the transaction. So here I see the exception that happens starting from the from line 17 where it was thrown by me in the add user method right after I do the update, which is my insert statement in the database. And then I go to my database and I see that the user is here, and my user is here because again Spring doesn't roll back for checked exceptions. And then I will delete this user from here. I apply and I select again to see that my database is empty again, and then I will go back and I will add here on the transactional the rollback for exception. So what I understood is that in your case you say I have added the rollback for exception class, but I can still see that the record is added in the database. Now if I use the rollback for exception class, then I expect that I will see that the record is no longer stored in the database, because I specifically instruct my transaction manager here to roll back for exception, so to roll back for the checked exception. So I will just run again the example. I will see the same exception in the stack trace. Again, I didn't change anything else. I have only added that rollback for on the transactional annotation, which in my case was over the class here. And then I will go back to the MySQL and I re-execute the select, and you can see that I have no record here because the transaction was rolled back in this case. So it didn't happen in the beginning because I have use the default behavior of Spring, which is it doesn't roll back for checked exceptions, but now that I have explicitly specified it should roll back for exception class, then it did roll back for exception class. Now one mistake that you might have done and is not working in your case is that maybe you forgot just to enable the transaction management here, which means that your transaction manager is not taken into consideration and the transactional annotation as well is not taken into consideration. I'm not sure if you could have skipped this. I believe that Spring would actually throw an exception if you skip to define a transaction manager, so I don't believe that it's possible that you have skipped this, but maybe you have simply forgot to provide the data source, or maybe you did provide a different data source. And of course, if you did provide a different data source or no data source, then the transactional the transaction manager wouldn't be able to roll back your transaction because it doesn't have the right data source. And another possibility is, of course, that instead of throwing the exception through the aspect, you did treat it here with a try catch. And in this case, if you treat it locally, then Spring will not see it because it doesn't get through the aspect that treats the transaction ability. So that's also a possible mistake for why it's not working in your case. So I hope that this solves your question. Anyway, I have shown you line by line how it works, and we have executed it with both cases. I will also place this project on my GitHub account and refer to it in a link, and let me know if it solves your question and if you find what you were doing wrong in your case. Thank you very much and hope to hear from you soon.